My name is Ruxandra Stoicescu, and I'm in charge of communications at the Swiss Network for International Studies. We are joined today by Professor Suerie Moon, Professor Gian-Luca Burci, and doctoral researcher Anthony Rizk from the Graduate Institute. And together they are the core team behind a recently concluded SNIS-funded project related to pathogen and benefit sharing in the global health governance system. My first question goes to Professor Gian-Luca Burci. What exactly is pathogen and benefit sharing, and why is it important to be aware of it?
Thank you for your question. Many thanks for inviting us, and many thanks obviously to SNIS for funding a project that was very exciting and hopefully useful. So pathogen sharing, we didn't hear much about it until recently, but it's really at the basis of how we prepare and respond to infectious diseases. And that's something that doctors, researchers, public health agency do it on a customary basis. If you're sick and they don't know what you have, they will gather samples of saliva or blood or tissue. And this sharing is not just domestic, it's international. And this has been going on for a very long time, in particular with the globalization of the pharmaceutical market, but also with the internationalization of scientific cooperation. And then you have also long-term standing collaboration networks. For example, influenza. The vaccine shot that you put in your arm once a year is the end of a long and very elaborate form of cooperation, global cooperation, that relies on the sharing of influenza samples. Things have changed. And that's in a way at the source of a project. The consensus is growing that also viruses and bacteria and parasites and fungi, so things that make us sick and can actually kill, are somehow part of biodiversity, are genetic resources. And this regime that I described has as a fundamental principle the idea of sovereignty over your genetic resources. So a bit perversely also on the pathogens that you find on your territory. And if you're sovereign, then you can regulate access to it. And then the issue of benefits come up. I'll give you my resources, but I want benefits in exchange. And that's been codified at the level of international law. And that's when pathogen and benefit sharing from a purely public health and medical issue has become a political, economic, and legal issue.
I am then heading towards my second question, which is addressed specifically to Anthony Rizk. And it concerns exactly what did the project look at with respect to these pathogen and benefit sharing processes? And therefore, what are the main findings of the project?
Thank you. So we did find that, generally speaking, the critical mass of our interviewees did agree that pathogen sharing does need to be on equal footing with fair and equitable benefits. So when pathogens are sent abroad, there should be fair and equitable benefit sharing that comes as a result. A lot of our respondents also spoke about changing practices. So what used to be acceptable in the past, for example, scientists going from one country to another to collect samples for the purposes of scientific research, was no longer as acceptable as it used to be, in favor now more for local collaboration with local scientists and collaboration with local governments. So I guess one of our key conclusions and one of our main conclusions is that part of ensuring that pathogen sharing is rapid is also ensuring that benefit sharing, or this confusion around benefit sharing.
So I would go towards my next question to Professor Suerie Moon. I wanted to ask specifically from you a reading of the research and the findings that this project obtained in light of these ongoing crises.
So there are some very, very direct implications. In January of 2020, there were big questions about, which countries could get physical samples from China of this virus. And there were challenges. As far as we know, it's not very clear exactly what was shared with whom, but we did hear concerns from a number of different countries and labs that they were having difficulty actually getting access to samples, especially in those early weeks. What Chinese researchers did do very, very early on, within the first week or so, was to share this genomic sequencing data that Professor Burci mentioned, and they shared that data on an open access platform online. And it was the sharing of that data that allowed a number of different labs and companies actually to begin working to analyze that data and begin developing measures to counteract the virus. And so it really illustrates, I think, the importance of rapid sharing of both physical samples as well as some of the data that is connected to those samples, and the very, very real human consequences of delays in the sharing of that information, as well as the huge economic potential for companies and others who get access to that information. I think it's really kind of captures it in a nutshell. What did become more and more important, and this is especially true over the last few months, was again the importance of countries sharing information very, very quickly about mutations in the virus. And scientists have very, very rapidly shared information internationally about those variants. They've shared this genomic sequencing data, and that has allowed other scientists to analyze what do these mutations mean. So I think the importance of having a reliable, fast global system for the sharing of physical samples, data, and the technologies that result has never been as clearly illustrated as over the last year. And because so many countries are realizing that they don't have reliable ways of getting access to those benefits, I'm concerned that the absence of a global system to ensure both the rapid flow of information on pathogens and to ensure the rapid flow of benefits, the absence of a global system to guarantee that puts us all at much greater risk. We indeed continue to have a highly uncertain, highly idiosyncratic, and I would say an ungoverned issue that really heightens the risks for everybody. Over.
And related to this, in this context, then how do you see the role of researchers such as your team of researchers in the elaboration of policies to precisely cover this vacuum that you notice?
The reason that we thought this was an important and relevant academic research project was because it was highly sensitive politically. There are huge economic and security and health interests at stake. The players really were not speaking to each other in terms of the main protagonists were not speaking to each other on a shared factual basis. And it was an issue that nobody wanted to touch. It was an issue that should have been resolved, frankly, many years ago, and certainly after the West African Ebola crisis, when again it was put on the table. But diplomats simply did not prioritize it, and I think it was considered too hot to handle in a way. And so for this reason, it was an appropriate moment as academic researchers to come in to help to strengthen the empirical foundation on which discussions could take place, to improve understanding, and to do that with the arm's length sort of dispassionate, independent perspective that academic researchers could bring to the table that no other player could bring. So NGOs couldn't do it, governments in the North and governments in the South couldn't do it. And I think even intergovernmental organizations would have struggled for many reasons to do this. So I think there was a very important and unique role for an academic team to come in. So what we did was we put on the table a menu of options, and I think what we concluded at the end of our project late last year was that the ball was really no longer in the court of researchers or academics like ourselves, that there was enough information, there was enough knowledge now, after we had gathered, I think, a fair amount of new empirical data, there was enough knowledge for diplomats and politicians to really take the ball and do their part, which is to take that information and begin the negotiations towards crafting a solution, towards crafting more reliable and clear and fair global rules to make sure that in future we do have rapid sharing of pathogen samples and we do have rapid sharing of vaccines and diagnostics and other benefits that might flow from them.
Right. Thank you very much. And anyone would like to add anything on this project or on this topic, please. Maybe there's something that we haven't thought of asking. Suerie?
Yes, I just wanted to mention the proposal by the Swiss government to host a BSL-4 lab here in Switzerland. So last November of 2020, there was an announcement that the Swiss government has offered to the World Health Organization to host a high security lab to receive pathogen samples. And I think this highlights the urgency and the realization that we have to do something to really strengthen what are, quite unclear and unreliable global arrangements. It's quite exciting to see that there might be, some very concrete steps forward right in our own backyard, and measures to try to address the uncertainty. At the same time, of course, having a lab alone will not answer a lot of the questions that we raised in our research in terms of, what will be the benefits that flow to contributors? How do you ensure, without clear rules or agreements, how do you ensure that countries do agree to quickly and voluntarily share samples and data?
Thank you. Yes, Gian-Luca Burci?
Yes, the point that we didn't raise in a previous responses, and we didn't really have the time to address in a project, actually it was a bit beyond the scope, is the question of sharing of animal pathogens. Because the fact of the matter is that most of the scary outbreaks that we saw in the last 20-25 years are all of zoonotic origins, pathogens that jump from animal to humans. And influenza actually is the first candidate. On the one hand, our empirical findings, very limited during the interviews, is that the sharing animal pathogens is easier than sharing human pathogens because there's less economic potential behind. Less money, more willingness to cooperate. But the other point is the interface between animals and humans, and COVID-19 is a graphic example of how complex that is. So in terms of more research and policy influence, that's a crucial point that I think will have to be addressed.
Right. Thank you very much. We at SNIS are very proud and very happy of how this project went, and we congratulate you again on having concluded it, and we hope that it'll gain bigger traction. And who knows, maybe the project that you mentioned can run again for some funding. And yeah, we wish you all the best for the next research and the next findings.